Hello friends, welcome to my channel. My name is Andre and let's talk movies. Free State of Jones is a film directed by Gary Ross, who wrote it together with Leonard Hartman. It stars Matthew McConaughey as a Confederate Army deserter who returns home and ends up leading a militia against a corrupt local government. It was released in 2016 and can be found on Netflix. That is until September 30th of this year. The film is based on the true story of Newton Knight, who felt like the Civil War was not his fight and that there were more important battles to be waged at home in Jones County, Mississippi. Free State of Jones begins in the middle of a battle of the Civil War. It introduces Newton Knight as a Confederate Army nurse who helps bring wounded soldiers back from the battlefield and to the doctors. He soon meets his nephew, who was recently drafted at a young age, and who introduces us to a new conflict happening at home: the abuse of farm owners at the hands of Confederate tax collectors. When Newton leaves the army and travels back to his home in Jones County, he puts himself in danger by sticking up for these abused families. As the film progresses, it shows us what kind of a person he is and the lengths he would go to help people.
How come you ain't up north fighting?
How come you ain't?
We continue to see what kinds of values Newton Knight has after he goes into hiding. He meets more and more people who have been through tough times at the hands of the Confederates and forges connections with runaway slaves and farmers alike.
They're gonna die so they can get rich selling their cotton.
That's why we live too.
From there, the film takes us through his journey of building a community of like-minded people and offering them a different way. Together, they take on the local government and establish the Free State of Jones in southern Mississippi.
We declare the land north of the Pascagoula Swamps, south of Enterprise, and east of the Pearl River to the Alabama border to be a free state of Jones.
The film's beginning is well made and very attention-grabbing. The tension here mainly comes from the war, and Newton seems to be incredibly smart when it comes to surviving the mayhem. As he leaves the army, however, the story seems to slow down. We are introduced to more aspects of the story and to the conflict brewing at home. Being based on a true story, the film has a strong hold on reality and seems to be pretty in touch with the political situation of the time. Every so often, we are shown old archival photographs that, with a little bit of text, explain the historical context of the time. These scenes help to ground the viewer like a documentary might. They are images that we must interpret and serve as transitions between more important shifts in the story. However, I feel like the transitions between Newton being in hiding to recruiting his militia and from wartime to post-war are quite glossed over. We don't see him actually make these decisions, but rather we see him carrying them out. These archival photo scenes are relied on a little bit too much, rather than showing us how these events affected him. I would have wanted to see a clearer tie between the deserters from the Confederate Army, the abused farmers, and the formation of his militia. It would have also been nice to see a bit more about how the end of the war affected him and the Free State of Jones. This aspect is something the film doesn't really focus on. Nevertheless, the film takes a fundamental turn when the Civil War ends. It becomes about the aftermath, showing us the injustices and discrimination against freed slaves that happened during the Reconstruction era through the lens of our characters. These scenes are very impactful and touch on important themes, but I think they ultimately fall flat because they're not what the story was building to.
But we gonna change something. All right, we just got to believe.
This part of the film just feels like we're moving on to the next thing that happens. I think this has to do with not enough tension around the Free State of Jones, which, might I remind you, is the title of the movie. It spends too much time on other things, then rushes through the accomplishments of the militia before ending with the social repercussions of the political situation. I feel like the film also tries to focus on so many different things at once, so many different aspects of his life, that we can't really latch on to one thing. Even though Newton makes lots of decisions about things, he still kind of feels like a passenger. It seems like we're shown a string of important events in his life. That's what this film feels like, an analysis of Newton Knight. To that effect, it also shows us how Newton's life affected his children. These scenes, however, are a huge jump into the future and aren't clearly linked to anything in the film's present until we arrive at the end. They took me out of the story because I wasn't sure who these characters were. Free State of Jones definitely doesn't hold your hand as it leads you through its story. There are scenes where they talk about important things, such as new laws that affect them, but ultimately the film relies on visual cues and imagery to tell its story. It also relies on the audience to make certain connections by themselves without being explicitly told. Throughout the film, there is often also a lack of music, something that I think contributes to the sense of realism that the film tries to convey. The cinematography is very good and visually aesthetic without distracting from the scenes. The editing is also very conscientious and shows us what's important. Something interesting that I noticed is that transitions between scenes are often tied to a certain object. Pacing of individual scenes can be a little slow sometimes, and shots aren't afraid to linger. However, I feel like this kind of reflects the slower pace of lives that characters lived back then. The film covers a lot of ground, and even though the pacing seems slow, scenes are generally quite short with large time jumps in between. They are like snippets of his life and what he does. Lots of snippets. I feel like this doesn't really let us into the character in the traditional sense. Usually the camera stays with the character and gives us a sense of their internal life. Here, while the camera does stay with Newton, it makes so many little jumps that it doesn't stick around to watch him contemplate his life. I feel like the point of this movie is to show this man's life and how it affected the people around him. It sets up his character and explores the political issues of his time and how he fits into them. It examines these themes through the lens of his story. I think that while this film talks about many important themes, it ultimately loses itself in trying to cover too many topics, rather than focusing on one aspect of this man's life and building everything up through that. If you decide to watch this film, be aware that you'll be in for more of a biographical story rather than a hardcore war movie. Free State of Jones. Have you seen it? Are you just now hearing about it? Let me know down below. My name is Andre and thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.